Hey everybody, Gromos here with some more Warthunder Histroic Battle footage. So, this time I fly the new Tier 7 La-5 a bit that was introduced in the 1.35 batch. That's the first La-5 I have flown since I just reached level 7 in the Russian tree when the batch was released. I have test flown the premium La-5FN in the German tree to compare it a bit. Well, let's have a look at the aircraft. The Tier 7 is of course the first La-5 that was produced and unsurprisingly performs the worst of the three variants we have currently in the game. As always, wing design and weight are important indicators of how the plane might perform and should be used. The La-5 has a relatively small and narrow wing, a little bit larger in wing area than a Bf-109. But the plane is also heavier than a 109, especially the earlier variants. That leads to a pretty high wing loading, a lot higher than on the Bf-109E and F. The later Gs have about the same wing loading. The La-5, like the La-3 and the Bf-109, has automatic leading edge slats that extend and improve handling at high angles of attack, but the difference is not that big. So turning should be avoided in this plane, because there are few fighters around this tier that can't turn better. The Corsair would be one of the few examples. The small wing of course produces less drag, which helps the plane's energy retention. So the La-5 is an energy fighter and should be used for that, and its relatively high speed for its tier helps with that. I think the engine upgrades are pretty important for this plane. They add a lot of horsepower and that helps a lot with keeping your energy up in vertical maneuvers. Armament wise, the plane has two powerful 20mm cannons in the nose. The guns have a high rate of fire and a decent muzzle velocity. On the flip side though, the guns have a relatively small ammo supply for weapons with such high rate of fire, so if you're not careful you can run out pretty fast. Also, the cannons mounted in the engine cowling have a very noticeable kick to it. Firing the cannons will make the nose of the plane jump up, an effect I have not encountered on other planes and is most likely caused by the installation of the guns above the engine instead of the more usual installation in the wings, or of a single cannon firing from the propeller hub. Something you have to keep in mind and counter when flying the plane with direct control, as it can otherwise throw off your aim pretty badly. So overall I would say, flown as an energy fighter, the La-5 is decent but not great. In comparison, I personally think that the La-5FN is a better plane at Tier 9 than the La-5 is at Tier 7. The La-5's improved engine is more powerful, making the plane faster and helps to keep up energy, but this of course is expected from a plane 2 tiers higher. However, in most other plane series, this usually comes with a trade-off. The plane gets heavier. The 109 and Spitfire lines are good examples for that. The further you go up the tree, from 109E over the F to the G version, the plane gets more powerful engines and often better armament, but also gets heavier and therefore the wing loading increases, making the later models worse turners than the earlier. The same goes for Spitfires and other fighter lines. Now, the higher speed and more powerful engine are of course more important for a fighter, but nonetheless it is a trade-off and the extra power comes with a price. The La-5FN on the other hand, while it gains enough of a power and speed increase for the 2 extra level, achieves this without making the plane heavier. As a matter of fact, a redesign of the structure make up for the slightly heavier engine and actually make the La-5FN lighter than the original La-5. So the FN has a slightly lower wing loading and turns just a little bit better than the Tier 7 La-5. Not much, but a bit. And the better engine helps of course to keep the energy up. On Tier 9 however, the La-5 will meet more planes that also have high wing loading, so up here the plane will meet more opponents it can turn with. And that, even though the plane stays an energy fighter, just makes the plane a bit more versatile and gives the pilot more options. So that's why, in my opinion, the later FN version is a better plane in Tier 5 than the La-5 is on Tier 7. But of course, this opinion is influenced by my personal playstyle and my preference for planes that can turn well enough to dogfight when they have to. That is something that is often overlooked when discussing the effectiveness of a plane. This effectiveness will be influenced by the fighting style, preferences and abilities of the pilot who flies it. Well then, that was a bit of info and opinions on the La-5. Let's take a look at a few fights in the La-5. Nothing special this time, I did not get a lot of good fights in the plane, but still I want to show you a bit more La-5 footage. The matches take all place on the new alternate history map, because I, like most people, just did not get much chance to play any other map the last few days. And in most matches the plane is not fully upgraded. So, here we have a bow fighter coming for a head-on, and we put the nose down to avoid it. But unlike the planes I flew last week, it would be a bad idea to immediately try to enter a turn fight with the bow in the La-5. The plane simply does not have the necessary turn capabilities, so we just fly past him and keep going. You have to be a bit careful when doing that though. The bow fighter in its current form has an exceptional energy retention in turns. Sometimes enough to catch right back up when you climb a bit after you pass him. If the 109 would not have bounced the bow, we might have needed some time to get a good separation before turning around. But thanks to my teammate, the bow is distracted and we can turn around right away and go on the offensive. I now have a good energy advantage, and what I like to do here is try just a little bit to go after him and see if I can turn tight enough to keep firing. The bow of course turns tighter, but in some cases the pilots just don't turn as well as they could because they are distracted and you can get good burst in. And indeed at first he goes into a spiraling turn, which I can follow because it puts emphasis on rolling, which my plane does well. But as soon as he stops the spiral and turns normal, I see I can't get the lead to fire and I pull out. If you notice you can't turn tight enough to get in fire position, don't waste more energy trying. Pull out and use the energy reserves you do have to do something else, like a yo-yo. In this case I had a Spitfire coming for me, so I stopped the attack altogether to get into a shallow dive to use the plane's good dive acceleration to get away from it. I am not sure what type of Spitfire it is at this point, but judging by how fast I pull away, it is most likely a lower tier Spitfire, which I can outrun in a dive as well as level flight. Higher tier Spits will be faster in level flight, but still have a hard time catching you in a dive. So from this altitude you can usually get to friendlies or the airbase AA cover. Again, my attacker gets distracted by one of my teammates though, a Yak-1, which is closing on him from behind and gives me the opportunity to turn back and go for the spit while he goes after the Yak. This is very much how you want to fight in a plane like the La-5 or other fast planes with high wing loading. When you have a more agile opponent coming in with an altitude advantage, use the good dive speed to get away and either, if there are friendlies close enough, drag your opponent until he has to react to your teammate and then go on the offensive, or if there aren't teammates close enough, just keep increasing the distance, and if you have enough of a power advantage, eventually zoom climb and get higher. Or, if you can't get enough of a speed advantage for that and your opponent is closing and won't break off, dive towards the friendly airbase to try and lose him with the AA's help. So I think working together with your team is quite important in this plane. Of course, teamwork is always beneficial, but I think in a boom and zoom or energy fighter with a high wing loading even more so. Of course, once you get a decent altitude advantage over your opponents, the La-5 with its good energy retention can beat multiple enemies at once. But You won't always be able to get this advantage, and if you are under attack from higher opponents, especially better turning ones, the best way to deal with them is in cooperation with your teammates. So I usually try to stick close to the highest group of friendlies and coordinate my actions a bit with what I see they are doing, as long as this is possible. Sure, you won't always get teams that are perfect for that, but in my experience, if you are willing to compromise a bit, you find a group to tag along with in most games. Of course, you lack any real communication, but most people will try to help out if they can, or at least notice a good opportunity for a kill if you present one by dragging an opponent around. In this fight I saw a small group of I-16s, pretty high with a clan tag. A good chance that they are coordinated, so I stick close to them and see if I can support them. A Spitfire is below them and I move that direction to see if I can get a shot at it while the Spitfire is focused on the I-16s. But as I get closer, there's a second one coming into the fight. I am not sure what type of Spitfire and if he's coming for me or the I-16s, but at first it looks like he's going for the I-16s, so I keep moving toward him, again hoping to get a shot at him while he's focused on my teammates. I check what the other Spit is doing to make sure he isn't coming for me, but he is diving away. And while looking, the newcomer, a Mark 9 as it turns out, was trying to climb up to me. But before I got to evade, one of the I-16s bounces him and he has to evade, giving me the opportunity to get behind him while he passes me. Again, I simply try if I can get enough lead to fire, even though the Spit should turn tighter, but he's most likely still focused on the I-16 and not turning as tight as he could, and I get a hit on the wing before I pull out to conserve altitude. If the Spit would have turned tighter, I could have used my higher energy state to pull out and do a vertical move as soon as I would have noticed that I can't turn tight enough to get in fire position. Now I turn after the damaged Spitfire, which is now diving away, but the I-16 is already on him, so I decide to stay higher and look for other targets. Here I make a bit of a mistake though. A new dot appears on the map, and since all the fighters I saw earlier were lower, I assume this one is one of the lower targets, and I look down first. But it is a Thunderbolt diving down from above, and I only see him in the last second. With only a split second to react, I don't manage to evade his fire in time and I take some damage. But luckily the bullets don't cause any terminal damage. The plane's elevator has taken a bit of damage, but with its high wing loading, the La-5 can't fully exploit all its normal elevator authority anyway. It would stall long before that, so all I have to do is pull a little harder than usual, and I can still get close to the stalling point in a turn. The Thunderbolt, maybe deceived by a critical hit message, does not zoom away, but decides to turn. Lucky for me, as the Thunderbolt is one of the very few planes on the enemy team that does not turn better than a La-5. Still, even though the Thunderbolt is very heavy, for its weight class it turns surprisingly well, and I need a high yo-yo followed by a low yo-yo to get behind him. What I've learned from that though is that even if all the planes you saw so far were lower, when a new dot appears on the minimap close to you and you don't know the position of every enemy fighter, it is better to look up first and then down. Well, let's take a look at one last little fight in the La-5. Shortly after the start of a round, a ground forces artillery and AA emplacement a fair bit away from the main objective comes under attack, and by the kill messages I can tell that it is fighters going for those ground targets. I want to take advantage of the low-flying fighters this far away from help, and I and the 109 move towards them. We catch them when they move from their original target to the next one, and it is 3 Spitfires and a Hellcat, all on very low altitude. I fly over them and do a split S to attack from the rear. The 109 goes after the Hellcat and Spitfires in front reverse to attack the 109, which decides to stick with the Hellcat instead of zooming after the attack. Two of the Spitfires, both 2Bs, go right after the 109, and a third one, a 2A, stays back a bit. I loop around to get behind the Spitfires that are chasing the 109, and I hope I get both of them. But as they pull up, I get only a shot at one of them, and with the third Spitfire still somewhere behind me, I have to be a bit more careful and zoom away to look for him before I come back. While I climb away, I look back and see that the Spitfire I hit is too damaged to stay and is leaving the fight, and the 109 got the Hellcat. That leaves only two Spitfires, one behind the 109, and the other one comes back into view and attacks the 109 from the front. With both the Spitfires now in sight and a lot lower, I reverse to attack again. In the meantime, the 109 manages to damage the 2A Spitfire as it attacked in a head-on, and I hope it is out of the fight, and go for the last remaining one. The 2A is not out of the fight completely though, and he tries to get a shot at me, but he is damaged and so low I don't think he can make it, so I only do a slight hop to make it a little harder for him to hit, and keep going for the undamaged one, hoping I might get there in time to save the 109. But just as I roll in for the attack, the 109 goes down. All I can do now is avenge my fallen teammate. I dive down on the Spit pretty steep, but I don't give it quite enough lead and I don't get hits. And then I zoom away again. There is still the damaged Spitfire after all, and I want to see what he is doing before I make my next move. It appears he is also leaving the fight, and the 2B Spitfire is now alone. So I loop around and come down for another attack, and while I do so, someone finished off the Spitfire I attacked earlier, so I don't have to worry about him coming back. This time I get a few hits in, but not enough to take him out, and while I zoom back up after the attack, he tries to climb after me. I zoomed too steep because I wanted to loop around for another attack right away, so he can fire a few bursts after me. If I had zoomed shallower, he most likely would not have been able to do that. It does not matter in this case. The few 7.7mm bullets don't do damage, and he of course does not have the speed to keep his nose pointed up for more than a second. But that is another thing you have to keep in mind when doing a dive attack on a good turner like a Spitfire. With their low wing loading, they might be able to point their nose up long enough to fire after you even on low speeds. If you do a shallow zoom, you are most likely too fast and out of range before he can get a shot off. But of course it will also take longer till you can attack again. Still, it was a small mistake to let him get those shots off in this situation. Even a few 7.7mm bullets can do terminal damage if they just happen to hit the exact right spot. It does not happen often, but it can happen. It's always better not to get hit at all, of course, and there was no reason to take the risk in this situation. Something to remember in the future. Well, by now the Spitfire is too damaged to put up much resistance anymore, and it is only a matter of time before he goes down. So, that was a bit of La-5 action, and this is it for this video. I know many would have liked to see some footage versus 109s as well, but again I simply almost never got the map for that, and the event that would have had that scenario was already over by the time I started flying the La-5. I hope I can change that when I fly the La-5 FN in a future video. Till then, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I see you next time.